Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Let's do the review for quiz one. All right, quiz one, we're going to be going through some vocabulary words that are in your readings. So let's take a look at some of those. All right. First vocabulary word is communication. And this is the process of generating meaning by sending and receiving verbal and non-verbal symbols and signs that are influenced by multiple contexts. And basically with this, what we see is a good definition of communication, but also it's very instructive. So, for example, it reminds us of sending and receiving messages. So, with sending, we're talking about obviously like speaking, but then receiving reminds us that we have to be good listeners to be effective speakers. And then it says verbal and nonverbal symbols. So, verbal meaning the words that you use, and then nonverbal is the not words. So, things like rate of delivery, projection, facial expressions, gestures, all those things are important too. And then symbols and signs reminds us that words are important and that we as humans create words and that we can decide to retire words that might be sexist, racist, homophobic, etc. And finally, influence multiple contexts. So kind of reminding us that like depending on the context that you're in is how you communicate. Like you might communicate differently at your if you're at the club versus the bus stop versus at home for dinner or hang out with your friends on a Friday night. For example, do you swear more at home or do you swear more with your friends? Probably you swear more with your friends, I'm guessing. So different contexts, we adjust our communication for depending on the context. Next vocabulary word is onomatopoeia. And onomatopoeia refers to the earliest of words that people probably used that were words that sounded like whatever it was. So if it was dog, for example, it would be barking, something like that. Uh, these are still popular in video games and also in comic books, like boom, tap, crack, all those things like in Batman. Next vocabulary word is rhetoric. And with rhetoric, what we have is we have a situation where we're being reminded that rhetoric originally was defined as speaking or writing well and persuasively. And Aristotle sort of popularized rhetoric. And I know sometimes we hear people say, oh, well, that's just rhetoric. But what they mean is empty rhetoric in that circumstance, which is where we have rhetoric where they have claims but no evidence. But we're talking about actual rhetoric here in this case, which is effective communication, speaking well and persuasively often. Next up, we have Cicero. Now, Cicero is an important figure in the world of communication. He came up with the canons of rhetoric. And here are the canons. The first canon is invention. Invention is the actual writing of the speech. Arrangement has to do with the organization of the speech. Style has to do with word choice. Delivery has to do with the nonverbal aspects of the speech. And memory has to do with whether or not the speech is memorized word for word. Or what we do more often in our communication classes is extemporaneous delivery, meaning that we've practiced our speech many times, but we're not tied to specific words and we're able to improvise, ad lib, and even freestyle sometimes. Next, we're going to be talking about the forms of communication, which is also a nice overview of the communication discipline and some of the various classes that we offer in communication. One is intrapersonal communication, which is communication with oneself. And we have a photo here of Edward from Twilight. And Twilight, originally, that book series was popular because it was really good at presenting the internal monologue of the character Bella. And a couple of years later, the author actually released one from Edward's perspective. And here's the author, the actual actor that plays Edward. So communicating with oneself is usually in your head, uh, is uh, is called intrapersonal communication. And then in contrast to that is interpersonal communication. And with interpersonal communication, typically you have two people communicating. Sometimes people refer to this as dyadic communication. And with dyadic communication, or interpersonal communication, it's just the unique dynamics that happen when there are two people in a room communicating. And here we have a picture of Hiram and Veronica Lodge from Riverdale, and they engaged in a lot of communication during the run of that series. Group communication is when you add that third person, and here we see a small group made up of Dakota Fanning, Kristen Stewart, and Joan Jett. And Joan Jett is giving them some background because they're making a movie about the Runaways, which is one of the first all-female rock bands. And then public communication. This is a sender focused form of communication in which one person is typically responsible for conveying information to an audience. And here we see Kamala Harris, a great public speaker. And that's actually the focus of this particular class. And then mass communication is when you are using technology to spread your communication to a broader audience. That would include YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, cable television, Facebook, uh, radio, all those different ways that we can get messages across to various people, even streaming services like Hulu. And then civic engagement is discussed in your textbook as being an important part of communication. Basically, public speaking ends up being a building block for democracy, and the United States tries really hard to have a democracy. So it says here, being a good civil servant means listening to information that's relevant to your communities, and using public outlets, voting, petitioning, or speaking. To participate in democracy, public speaking becomes a necessary outlet to advocate for issues within and for your community. It's a way to become civically engaged, and the photo here is from the TV show on Netflix called Society or The Society, and it's where a group of high school students suddenly have to create a society, and the leader of the group ends up rising up is played by Catherine Newton, and she has to do a lot of public speaking to lead the group. Your authors also talk about social justice, and basically with social justice, what we're talking about is uh, all of the communication that takes place around trying to reach equality. And there's lots of ways to try to achieve equality, but one of them is through public speaking to try to get people to take on new policies that are create more equality. And then demagoguery, which is actions that attempt to manipulate by distorting an audience through prejudice and emotion. Sometimes people use communication for evil. For example, they leverage people's racism. And ethos is one of the three artistic proofs that Aristotle came up with, and in this case, it deals with the speaker's credibility and being a believable speaker. And in this sequence, we see the actor Marlon Brando captured here. And he's questioning who has more credibility, him or the police. And it's a good discussion of how important ethos is and how important credibility is. All right, so those are vocabulary words for quiz number one. So hope you enjoy the quiz, do really well on it, and have an amazing quiz experience. All right, thanks.